standing in my empty apartment holding the crumpled invitation to what should have been my biggest night. I never imagined my own sister would destroy everything I had worked for. The prestigious journalism award ceremony was supposed to celebrate my exposé on corporate fraud, but Vivian's cruel words still echoed, "We don't have time for stupid awards, Aurora." What I discovered that night changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty blood ties and the people who claim to love you most. Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, I want to know where you're watching from tonight. If this hook already has you hooked, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this family revenge drama is about to get absolutely wild. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next when family secrets start unraveling in the most shocking way possible. My name is Aurora Delacroix, and for 28 years, I believed my family was everything. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, I was the middle child between my older sister Vivian and younger brother Marcus. Our parents, successful real estate developers, always emphasized family first. But that night, everything shattered like glass hitting concrete. The Cascade Journalism Excellence Award was the pinnacle of my career. After 6 months investigating Meridian Construction's fraudulent practices, my article had exposed how they were cutting corners on low-income housing projects while pocketing federal subsidies. The investigation had consumed my life, cost me relationships, and pushed me to the edge of financial ruin, but it was worth it. 20 families had been relocated to safe housing because of my work. When I called Vivian to invite her to the ceremony, her response cut deeper than any criticism from strangers ever could. "Aurora, honestly, we don't have time for stupid awards. Some of us have real responsibilities." Her voice dripped with the same condescension she had used since we were children, but this felt different, more calculated, more cruel. "It's not stupid, Viv. This is the biggest moment of my career. I thought my family would want to celebrate with me." "Celebrate what? Playing pretend journalist Aurora, you're 30 years old. When are you going to grow up and get a real job? Mom and Dad are worried sick about you living in that shoebox apartment, barely making ends meet." The conversation ended with her hanging up on me. Marcus declined more politely, but cited a work commitment that sounded suspiciously vague. My parents claimed they had a prior engagement that couldn't be moved, though they had seemed excited about the award just weeks earlier. Sitting alone at the ceremony, watching colleagues celebrate with their families, I felt more isolated than ever. The award itself felt hollow in my hands. As I gave my acceptance speech to a room full of industry professionals, I spotted something that made my blood run cold. In the back corner, partially hidden behind a pillar, stood my brother-in-law, Derek. Vivian's husband of 5 years was supposed to be at the important business dinner that had prevented my sister from attending. He was deep in conversation with a man I recognized from my investigation, Richard Kellman, the CEO of Meridian Construction. My journalistic instincts kicked in immediately. I excused myself from the reception and followed them to the hotel bar, staying far enough away to avoid detection, but close enough to catch fragments of their conversation. "The investigation is closed," Derek was saying. "Aurora got her little award and everyone's moved on. The spotlight is off Meridian now." Kellman's response chilled me to the bone. "Your wife played her part perfectly. Making sure Aurora felt isolated from the family during the investigation was genius. She was so desperate to prove herself, she never dug deep enough to find the real story. Vivian knows how to push Aurora's buttons. She's been doing it since they were kids. The inheritance manipulation was just the beginning." I nearly dropped my clutch. Inheritance manipulation? What were they talking about? "The doctored financial records you provided were perfect," Kellman continued. "Aurora found exactly what we wanted her to find. Nothing more, nothing less. The federal investigation team was satisfied with the surface-level corruption. They have no idea about the offshore accounts or the political kickbacks. Derek chuckled coldly. Aurora always was the idealistic one. She thought she was saving the world with her little exposé. Meanwhile, we've been moving money through Vivian's real estate firm for 3 years. Aurora's investigation actually helped us clean up our paper trail. My mind reeled as the pieces fell into place. My sister hadn't just dismissed my work. She had actively sabotaged it. The family business that I had always been excluded from wasn't just real estate development. It was money laundering for Meridian Construction. The best part, Derek continued, is that Aurora thinks she's the family disappointment. She has no idea that her parents have been funneling money through fake development projects. She was so busy trying to prove herself worthy of their approval that she never questioned why they suddenly started treating her like an outsider. The conversation shifted to logistics about moving more money, but I had heard enough. I slipped away from the bar, my mind racing with the implications. Everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. The financial struggles they claimed to have, the disappointment in my career choices, the constant criticism. It was all designed to keep me distracted and insecure. Back in my apartment that night, I stared at my award while pieces of a much larger puzzle began forming in my mind. The timing of my parents' sudden coldness toward me coincided perfectly with when I had started the Meridian investigation. Vivian's increased criticism and emotional manipulation had ramped up significantly during those same months. I pulled out my laptop and began researching Delacroix Development Holdings, my parents' company. What I found in public records made my stomach turn. Shell companies, suspicious transfers, and a pattern of properties that existed only on paper. The company had received numerous government contracts for low-income housing developments that were never completed or were built so poorly they had to be condemned within years. My phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. "Hope your little award made you feel better about yourself. Some of us are building real wealth for the next generation." The cruelty in that message, combined with everything I had just learned, ignited something fierce inside me. They had used my own insecurities and desire for family approval to blind me to their criminal enterprise. They had manipulated my investigation to serve their purposes while making me feel like a failure. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated exactly how good I was at my job. My investigation into Meridian had been surface level because I had been emotionally compromised and desperate for family approval. This time, I would investigate with the cold precision of someone who had nothing left to lose. I spent the rest of the night creating a secure digital folder and beginning what would become the most important investigation of my career. This wasn't about a prestigious award anymore. This was about justice, truth, and making sure that the people who had betrayed my trust faced the consequences of their actions. My family thought they knew Aurora Delacroix, the insecure middle child desperate for approval. They were about to meet a very different version of me. The next 3 weeks transformed me into someone I barely recognized. Gone was the insecure woman seeking family validation. In her place emerged a methodical investigator driven by cold fury and absolute determination. I took a leave of absence from my regular freelance work and threw myself completely into unraveling my family's criminal enterprise. My first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While researching Delacroix Development Holdings' financial records, I discovered that my grandmother's estate, worth over $2 million when she passed 5 years ago, had been systematically drained through fraudulent real estate transactions. Properties that existed only on paper had somehow generated massive losses that justified liquidating her assets. The inheritance I thought had been lost to market crashes and bad investments had actually been stolen by my own parents and funneled through Vivian's subsidiary companies. Every family gathering where they had commiserated about Grandma Rose's poor financial decisions had been theater designed to cover their theft of money that should have been split equally between Vivian, Marcus, and me. But the inheritance fraud was just the tip of the iceberg. Using techniques I had learned during my investigative journalism training, I began following the money trail through public records business filings and property databases. What I uncovered was a sophisticated network that would have impressed federal prosecutors. Delacroix Development Holdings operated at least 12 shell companies, each designed to obscure the flow of money from Meridian Construction and two other major contractors. These companies would bid on government contracts for affordable housing projects, win through a combination of lowest bids and what I now realized were political kickbacks, then either never complete the projects or build substandard housing that would fail inspection within years. The genius of their scheme was in the failure. When projects collapsed or were condemned, insurance payouts and government remediation funds would flow back through the network, often exceeding the original contract amounts. Meanwhile, families needing affordable housing were left in dangerous conditions or homeless entirely. My breaking point came when I discovered that one of their failed projects had resulted in the death of Maria Santos, a single mother whose apartment ceiling had collapsed due to substandard construction. The insurance investigation had been superficial, the death ruled accidental, and her 3 children placed in foster care. My family had essentially profited from this woman's death. I knew I needed irrefutable evidence before making any accusations. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about ensuring my family faced consequences while protecting myself from their inevitable retaliation. I began systematically documenting everything, creating multiple backup copies stored in different locations. The confrontation came sooner than I had planned. Marcus called on a Thursday evening, his voice carrying an edge I had never heard before. "Aurora, we need to talk. Family dinner this Sunday. Don't make other plans." "I'm busy this weekend, Marcus. Maybe next month." "This isn't a request. Vivian says you've been asking weird questions about the family business. Mom and Dad want to clear the air." The fact that Vivian was monitoring my activities confirmed my suspicions that they knew I was investigating. I agreed to the dinner knowing it would likely be my only opportunity to confront them with evidence before they destroyed it or disappeared. Sunday dinner at my parents' hillside mansion felt like walking into a tribunal. Vivian and Derek sat across from me, their expressions carefully neutral. Marcus avoided eye contact entirely. My parents, William and Catherine Delacroix, flanked the head of the table like judges. "Aurora," my father began without preamble. "Vivian tells us you've been making inquiries about our business practices. We're concerned about your mental state since the awards ceremony. You've seemed unstable." The gaslighting attempt was so transparent it was almost laughable. "I've been researching Delacroix Development Holdings. Interesting company. Lots of failed projects." "Sometimes investments don't work out," my mother said smoothly. "That's the nature of business. Your grandmother understood that risk when she chose to invest her estate with us." "Chose to invest." I pulled out a folder containing printed financial records. Or had her money stolen through fraudulent property transfers while she was suffering from early-stage dementia. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vivian's carefully composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Aurora," Derek interjected, "you're making some very serious accusations without understanding the complexities of real estate investment." "I understand money laundering when I see it." I spread documents across the mahogany table. 12 shell companies, fraudulent government contracts, political kickbacks, and that's just from 3 weeks of investigation. My father's face flushed red. "How dare you come into our home and make these ridiculous claims? After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. Everything you've done for me." My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "You mean emotionally manipulating me to keep me distracted while you stole from your own mother, using my investigation into Meridian to clean up your money laundering operation, making me feel like a family disappointment while you built wealth on the backs of families who needed safe housing." Vivian finally spoke, her voice dripping with disdain. "You always were too emotional, Aurora. Too idealistic. The real world doesn't work the way you think it does. The real world includes consequences for criminal behavior." I stood up, gathering my documents. "Maria Santos died because of your substandard construction. Her children are in foster care because your greed killed their mother." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Marcus, who had been quiet throughout the confrontation, surprised everyone. "She's right about Maria Santos," he said quietly. "I've been having nightmares about that project for 2 years. We knew the building wasn't safe, but Dad said it would be too expensive to fix." "Marcus, shut up!" Vivian snapped, but the damage was done. "No, I'm done being quiet. Aurora, I've been wanting to tell you the truth for months, but I was scared. They've been planning to frame you if anyone ever investigated the money laundering. They have documents that make it look like you were involved in the Meridian payoffs." The room erupted in shouting. My parents began threatening Marcus while Vivian screamed about family loyalty. Derek tried to physically intimidate me into giving up the documents, but I had heard enough. "This conversation is being recorded," I announced loudly, holding up my phone. "Every admission, every threat, every detail about your criminal enterprise." In the chaos that followed, I walked out of that house knowing I could never return. My family wasn't just morally bankrupt, they were dangerous. And now they knew I posed a threat to everything they had built. As I drove home through the Portland rain, I realized this was just the beginning. They would come after me with everything they had, but I was no longer the insecure woman desperate for their approval. I was an investigative journalist with evidence of multiple felonies, and I was going to make sure justice was served. The war between us had officially begun. The retaliation began within 48 hours of our confrontation. I woke up Tuesday morning to find my freelance contracts mysteriously canceled, my bank account frozen due to suspicious activity, and a cease and desist letter from a law firm I had never heard of demanding I stop spreading malicious lies about my family's business. But they had made a crucial error. In their rush to intimidate me, they had revealed just how extensive their influence network really was. The law firm handling their threats was the same one that had represented Meridian Construction during my original investigation. The bank freezing my accounts was owned by the same parent company that held mortgages on several of their shell company properties. They weren't just connected to political corruption. They owned pieces of the infrastructure designed to protect them. That realization led me to understand something important. I couldn't fight this alone. They had spent years building a network of corrupt officials, complicit businesses, and intimidated witnesses. To have any chance of success, I needed to build my own alliance of people who had been harmed by their schemes. My first ally came from an unexpected place. After my story about the confrontation appeared on my blog, carefully worded to avoid libel while revealing the truth, I received an email from someone named Jennifer Walsh, a forensic accountant who had worked for the State Housing Authority 3 years earlier. I tried to flag irregularities in Delacroix Development Holdings contracts back in 2021. Her email read, "My supervisor buried my report, and I was transferred to a different department. I've been waiting for someone with the courage to investigate them properly." We met at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, and Jennifer brought with her a treasure trove of evidence I never could have obtained on my own. Internal memos questioning the validity of Delacroix projects. Email chains showing pressure from political appointees to approve contracts despite red flags. Most importantly, she had copies of the original financial assessments that showed several projects were deliberately designed to fail. "They've been doing this for at least a decade," Jennifer explained, sliding a thick folder across our table. But it got worse after your grandmother's death. Suddenly, they had access to much larger amounts of capital and they started taking bigger risks. How many people know about this? More than you'd think. But most are too scared to speak up or they've been bought off. Your family doesn't just threaten people, they reward loyalty and punish dissent very effectively. Jennifer introduced me to my second ally, Detective Carlos Rivera, a Portland Police Bureau investigator who had been quietly building a case against political corruption in the Housing Authority for 2 years. His investigation had repeatedly hit dead ends due to what he suspected was interference from higher up the chain of command. "I've been watching your family's activities for months," Rivera told me during our clandestine meeting in his unmarked car. "But every time I get close to building a solid case, evidence disappears or witnesses suddenly become unavailable." He showed me surveillance photos of my family meeting with city council members, state housing officials, and contractors I recognized from my Meridian investigation. This isn't just about money laundering. They're part of a comprehensive corruption network that reaches into multiple levels of government. What do you need from me? Evidence that can't disappear. Your recordings from the family dinner are good, but we need documentation that proves the financial crimes. And we need witnesses who are willing to testify, not just whistleblowers who can be discredited. That's when I had my breakthrough idea. Instead of trying to work around their corruption network, I would use it against them. If they had been buying silence and loyalty for years, some of those relationships had to be vulnerable to pressure or incentives to flip. My third ally was someone I recruited deliberately, Sarah Chin, a city planning official who had approved numerous Delacroix projects despite obvious problems. Through careful investigation, I discovered that Sarah's approval had been purchased through her gambling debts being mysteriously paid off by a shell company connected to my family. Rather than expose her immediately, I approached Sarah with an offer cooperation in exchange for immunity. She was so relieved to finally tell the truth that she broke down crying in my car. "They've been blackmailing me for 3 years," she sobbed. "After they paid my debts, they said I owed them loyalty. Every project I questioned, they reminded me that gambling addiction could cost me my job and my pension." Sarah provided the final piece of the puzzle, a recording system that my family didn't know existed. City planning meetings were automatically recorded and archived, including preliminary discussions that happened before official sessions. Months of my family pressuring officials, making threats, and explicitly discussing bribes were all captured on government servers. But building this alliance also revealed how dangerous my family had become. Jennifer received a suspicious job offer that would require relocating to another state. Detective Rivera was suddenly assigned to a major case that would consume all his time for the next 6 months. Sarah's supervisor began questioning her work performance and hinting at disciplinary action. The pressure campaign against me escalated dramatically. My landlord received anonymous complaints about noise and property damage that resulted in an eviction notice. My car was vandalized twice in 1 week. Most frighteningly, I began noticing the same vehicles following me on different days and strangers asking my neighbors questions about my schedule and activities. The message was clear: stop investigating or face escalating consequences. That's when Marcus reached out to me secretly. He called from a burner phone, his voice shaking with fear and guilt. "Aurora, I need to meet with you. Alone. They're planning something bad." We met at a hiking trail outside the city, both of us checking constantly to ensure we weren't followed. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. "They know about your allies," he said immediately. "Derek has connections with private investigators and security companies. They've been surveilling everyone you've been in contact with." "How do they know?" "They hacked your email and phone. Vivian has been reading everything for weeks." Marcus pulled out a small device. This is a signal detector. Your phone has been compromised with spyware. The violation felt almost worse than the financial crimes. My family hadn't just betrayed my trust. They had invaded my privacy and used that information to threaten innocent people. There's more, Marcus continued. They're planning to frame you for the Maria Santos death. Derek has been creating forged documents that show you were involved in approving the construction shortcuts. They're going to claim you were working with them all along and only started the investigation to cover your tracks when you realized you'd be caught. Why are you telling me this? Because I can't live with it anymore. Maria Santos had 3 kids, Aurora. Her oldest daughter is the same age as my son. Every time I look at him, I think about those children growing up without their mother because we chose profit over safety. Marcus handed me a USB drive. Everything is on here. Financial records, email communications, even video recordings from Derek's home office where they planned the frame job. I've been copying files for months waiting for the courage to do the right thing. They'll destroy you for this. They're going to destroy me anyway. Vivian has been talking about eliminating loose ends. I think she's planning to have Dad take the fall for everything while she and Derek disappear with the offshore money. This revelation changed everything. My family wasn't just criminal. They were willing to sacrifice each other to protect their wealth. Marcus's betrayal of their conspiracy meant I finally had an insider who could provide real-time intelligence about their plans. But it also meant the stakes had escalated beyond financial crimes and corruption. If they were planning to frame me for Maria Santos's death, they weren't just trying to silence me. They were trying to destroy my life completely. As Marcus and I parted ways, both of us knowing this might be the last time we saw each other as free people, I realized that my alliance was strong enough to challenge their corruption network. The question was whether it would be strong enough to survive their retaliation. The real war was just beginning, and the next move would determine whether justice prevailed or whether my family's criminal empire would eliminate everyone who threatened it. The betrayal came from the person I trusted most. 3 days after Marcus gave me the USB drive with evidence of their frame job, Detective Rivera called with urgent news. Aurora, we have a problem. Someone leaked information about our investigation to your family. They know about Jennifer, Sarah, and Marcus's cooperation. We need to move fast. My blood ran cold. How do you know? Sarah Chin was arrested this morning on fabricated bribery charges. Jennifer Walsh's car was run off the road last night. She's in the hospital with a broken arm and won't talk to anyone. And Marcus... Rivera paused. Marcus is missing. His wife filed a report saying he never came home from work yesterday. The systematic targeting of my allies felt too coordinated, too precise. Someone with inside knowledge of our investigation had fed information directly to my family. But who, Rivera, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Who else knows about our collaboration? Just my partner, Detective Kim Walsh, and my supervisor, Lieutenant Morrison. Why? Something about the name Walsh triggered a memory. Walsh is Detective Kim related to Jennifer Walsh. The silence on the other end of the line lasted too long. Aurora, I need to call you back. But he never did. When I tried calling Rivera's number an hour later, it went straight to voicemail. When I called the Portland Police Bureau and asked for Detective Rivera, they told me he was on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. The trap had been perfectly constructed. Detective Kim Walsh wasn't just related to Jennifer. She was Jennifer's sister-in-law married to Jennifer's brother. The family connection meant Jennifer had trusted Kim with details about our evidence gathering. Kim had been feeding information to my family while pretending to support Rivera's investigation. I realized with growing horror that every move we had made had been anticipated. Every piece of evidence we thought was secret had been countered. Sarah Chin's arrest wasn't random. They had prepared charges that would discredit her testimony. Jennifer's car accident wasn't coincidental. They had tried to eliminate her before she could testify. And Marcus's disappearance meant the USB drive evidence might be worthless if he couldn't verify its authenticity. But the worst revelation came when I received a call from an unknown number that evening. "Aurora, it's Jennifer. I'm calling from the hospital. Kim Walsh just visited me and she wasn't here as a concerned family member." "What do you mean?" "She offered me a choice. Drop the investigation and accept a settlement for my car accident or face federal charges for allegedly falsifying government documents. She had paperwork that made it look like I had been taking bribes to approve your family's projects." The sophisticated frame job was even more extensive than Marcus had warned me about. They hadn't just prepared fake evidence against me. They had created compromising materials for everyone in our alliance. "There's something else," Jennifer continued, her voice breaking. "Kim showed me photos of my daughter leaving school. She said it would be terrible if something happened to compromise my child's safety while I was distracted by legal troubles. They were threatening children. My family's corruption had evolved into something genuinely dangerous, and they were willing to hurt innocent people to protect their criminal empire." That night, I sat in my apartment trying to process how completely my alliance had been compromised. Marcus was missing and possibly dead. Jennifer was terrorized into silence. Sarah was facing federal charges. Rivera was under investigation and couldn't help anyone. Then my phone rang with a number I recognized: Vivian. "Hello, little sister. I hear you've been having some difficulties with your investigation." "Where is Marcus, Vivian?" "Marcus is safe. For now. He's reconsidering his priorities and remembering where his loyalties should lie." "You're threatening your own brother." "I'm protecting my family from a delusional woman who thinks she can destroy everything we've built." "Aurora, you have 24 hours to return all the evidence you've stolen and publish a retraction of your accusations. Otherwise, Marcus might have a very unfortunate accident, and your little alliance of whistleblowers might discover that crossing the Delacroix family has permanent consequences." The call ended, leaving me alone with the devastating realization that I had led good people into a trap that could get them killed. My investigation had endangered everyone who had tried to help me, and my family was prepared to commit murder to silence us. I spent that night staring at my computer screen, drafting the retraction they had demanded. Maybe it was better to publish the apology and hope they would honor their promise to leave my allies alone. Maybe fighting corruption wasn't worth risking innocent lives. But as I wrote the false confession, I kept thinking about Maria Santos and her 3 children, about the dozens of families who had been harmed by substandard housing, about the victims who would suffer in the future if this criminal network continued operating with impunity. At 3 in the morning, I made a decision that would either save lives or get me killed. Instead of publishing a retraction, I would escalate the fight in a way my family wouldn't anticipate. I spent the remaining hours before dawn uploading everything to multiple secure servers, creating dead man switches that would automatically release the evidence if anything happened to me, and preparing for what might be my final confrontation with the people who had raised me. The next morning, I received a text from Marcus's phone. "Meet at the warehouse on Industrial Avenue. Come alone or people start getting hurt." I knew it was almost certainly a trap. My family had eliminated my allies, compromised my evidence, and isolated me completely. Walking into that warehouse would probably mean my death or disappearance. But I also knew that surrendering wouldn't save anyone. People like my family don't honor agreements with their victims. They eliminate threats permanently. As I drove toward what might be my execution, I realized that sometimes fighting for justice means accepting that you might not live to see it achieved. The evidence would survive even if I didn't, and maybe someone else would have the courage to finish what I had started. The warehouse loomed ahead of me like a concrete monument to my family's corruption. I checked my phone one last time to ensure the dead man's switches were armed, said a prayer for Marcus and my other allies, and walked through the door to face whatever consequences awaited me. If this was the end of Aurora Delacroix's story, at least it would end with the truth preserved and ready to destroy the people who had betrayed everything family was supposed to represent. The warehouse wasn't the execution chamber I had expected. Instead, I found Marcus tied to a chair in the center of an empty space, very much alive, but clearly terrorized. Standing around him were Derek, two men I didn't recognize who looked like private security, and surprisingly, Detective Kim Walsh in plain clothes. "Aurora!" Derek called out as I entered. "So glad you could join our little family reunion. Let Marcus go. This is between us." "Actually, it's not." Kim Walsh stepped forward and I noticed she was wearing a wire. "This is between you and federal law enforcement. I'm Agent Walsh, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Your family has been under federal investigation for 18 months. My mind reeled as the pieces rearranged themselves. "You're not Detective Rivera's partner." "Rivera is FBI too. We've been running a joint operation between federal and local law enforcement. Your investigation actually complicated our work initially, but it also provided crucial evidence we couldn't have obtained through traditional surveillance." Derek's face had gone pale. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Your family made the mistake of bribing a federal housing official 6 months ago. That made this a federal case involving interstate commerce wire fraud and racketeering. We've been building a RICO prosecution that will put all of you away for decades." The men I had taken for private security were actually federal agents. The warehouse was equipped with recording equipment that had captured everything said since I arrived. But more importantly, Marcus wasn't a victim. He had been working with the FBI as an informant for months. "Marcus came to us after Maria Santos died," Agent Walsh explained. "He couldn't live with the guilt and volunteered to help us gather evidence from inside your family's organization." Marcus looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you, Aurora, but your investigation was threatening to expose our operation before we could gather enough evidence to prosecute everyone involved." "Everyone?" I asked. "Your parents, Vivian, Derek, 3 city council members, 2 state housing officials, 4 contractors including Meridian Construction, and 12 other individuals involved in the money laundering network. We estimate the total fraud at over $40 million across 6 years." Agent Walsh handed me a tablet displaying surveillance footage I had never seen before. My family meeting with politicians, contractors, and officials. Financial transfers between shell companies. Most damning of all, a recording of Vivian and Derek explicitly discussing Maria Santos's death and deciding to continue using substandard materials because people who can't afford quality housing don't deserve better. "We needed someone on the outside investigating independently to corroborate our findings," Agent Walsh continued. "When you started digging, we realized you could provide civilian evidence that would be much stronger in court than anything we obtained through surveillance." "So Jennifer, Sarah, Detective Rivera, they were all part of this. Jennifer is genuine. She really was transferred for trying to report your family's crimes. But we approached her months ago and she agreed to help. Sarah Chen was already cooperating with us before you contacted her. Rivera is one of our most experienced undercover agents." The betrayal I had felt was evaporating, replaced by something much more powerful validation. My investigation hadn't been futile or naive. It had been part of a larger operation that would finally deliver justice. "There's more," Marcus said quietly. "The inheritance money from Grandma Rose. The FBI helped me trace all of it. Every dollar can be recovered and returned to the estate." "What about the threats against Jennifer's daughter?" "Theater," Agent Walsh replied. "We needed your family to believe they were winning so they would continue operating normally while we gathered final evidence. Jennifer was never in real danger and neither was her daughter." Derek finally found his voice. This is entrapment. You can't use evidence obtained through family manipulation. Actually, we can. Agent Walsh smiled coldly. Marcus isn't law enforcement, so anything he observed or recorded as a family member is admissible. And Aurora's investigation was completely independent. She uncovered evidence we couldn't have obtained legally any other way. The agents began placing Derek and the other conspirators under arrest while explaining the charges: racketeering, money laundering, wire fraud conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery of federal officials, and in the case of Maria Santos's death, negligent homicide. "Where are my parents and Vivian?" I asked, being arrested simultaneously at their homes. We coordinated raids across multiple locations to prevent anyone from destroying evidence or fleeing. As we left the warehouse, Marcus walked beside me, no longer the frightened man I thought had been kidnapped. "How long have you been working with the FBI?" "Since 3 weeks after Maria Santos died. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't look at my own children without thinking about hers. When I finally contacted law enforcement, they told me federal agents had already been investigating but needed inside access." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because your investigation was too good. The FBI needed you to continue working independently so your evidence would be untainted by law enforcement involvement. If you had known about the federal investigation, a defense attorney could argue that all your findings were compromised." That evening, I sat in my apartment watching news reports about the arrests. Federal agents had seized millions in assets, closed dozens of shell companies, and arrested what prosecutors were calling one of the most sophisticated municipal corruption rings in Oregon history. The news anchors mentioned that the investigation began with independent journalism by Aurora Delacroix, whose award-winning reporting on corporate fraud had led to the discovery of a much larger criminal enterprise. My phone rang with calls from news outlets, book publishers, and documentary filmmakers. The story that had started with my family's betrayal was becoming a national example of how individual courage could bring down institutional corruption. But the most important call came from a social worker in Portland. Maria Santos's children wanted to meet me. Their foster parents had explained how my investigation had led to justice for their mother's death, and the kids wanted to thank me personally. Agent Walsh called that night with final updates. "Your family's cooperation is mixed. Your parents are trying to cut deals by providing information about other corrupt officials. Vivian is claiming she was coerced by Derek. Derek is blaming everyone else. What about Marcus? Marcus will likely receive immunity in exchange for his cooperation, but he'll face civil liability for his participation in the early stages. And the victims. Restitution will be substantial. Between asset seizures and insurance settlements, most of the affected families will receive compensation. The Santos children will have their college educations fully funded from recovered assets." As I hung up the phone, I realized that the story wasn't quite over. Tomorrow would bring trials testimony and the long process of rebuilding trust in institutions that had been corrupted. But tonight, for the first time in months, I could sleep knowing that justice wasn't just a concept, it was happening. 6 months later, I stood in a federal courthouse watching my sister receive a 12-year sentence for racketeering and conspiracy to commit fraud. The woman who had sneered at my award ceremony now wore an orange jumpsuit and shackles her carefully constructed life of wealth and privilege, reduced to a prisoner number. The trials had been swift and decisive. With Marcus's inside testimony, Agent Walsh's surveillance evidence, and my independent investigation providing corroboration, the prosecution had built an unshakable case. My parents received 8 and 10-year sentences respectively. Derek got 15 years as the primary organizer of the money laundering scheme. The corrupt officials who had enabled their crimes received sentences ranging from 3 to 7 years. But the most satisfying moment came when the judge addressed the victims. Maria Santos's children now living with relatives who could provide proper care thanks to the restitution fund sat in the front row as the judge explained how the recovered assets would ensure their education and financial security for life. This case represents more than financial crime, Judge Morrison had said during sentencing. It represents a fundamental betrayal of public trust and human decency. The defendants prioritized personal wealth over public safety, resulting in the death of an innocent mother and endangering countless families. The restitution exceeded $42 million. Every family affected by substandard housing received compensation. The Santos Children's Trust Fund would cover their expenses through graduate school. City programs funded by the recovered assets were rebuilding the affordable housing projects that had been sabotaged by corruption. Marcus and I had slowly rebuilt our relationship over the months of testimony and trials. His cooperation with the federal law enforcement had saved him from serious prison time, but he faced civil penalties that would consume most of his savings. More importantly, he was attending therapy to process the guilt over his participation in crimes that had cost lives. "I know I can never undo what I helped enable," he told me after Vivian's sentencing, "but I want to spend the rest of my life making sure nothing like this happens again." Marcus had started working with a nonprofit organization that monitors municipal contracts for signs of corruption. His inside knowledge of how these schemes operate made him invaluable in training auditors and investigators to recognize red flags. The most unexpected development was my relationship with Agent Walsh and the law enforcement team. What had begun as a professional collaboration evolved into genuine friendships built on shared commitment to justice. Jennifer Walsh had become something of a mentor, teaching me advanced investigative techniques that I now used in my expanded freelance practice. My career had transformed dramatically. The federal corruption case had established my reputation as an investigative journalist willing to tackle powerful interests. News organizations competed for my work, and I had signed a book deal to tell the complete story of bringing down my family's criminal empire. The book would be titled, "Blood Money: How I Exposed My Own Family's Corruption Empire." But the most meaningful change was personal. The family that had raised me was gone, destroyed by their own greed and cruelty. In its place, I had found something better, a chosen family of people united by shared values rather than shared genetics. Jennifer Walsh and I met monthly for dinner, sharing stories about our investigations and supporting each other through the emotional challenges of fighting institutional corruption. Detective Rivera, whose real name was Agent Miguel Santos, no relation to Maria, though the coincidence had motivated his commitment to the case, had become a close friend who understood the psychological toll of investigating people you once trusted. The Santos children had become an important part of my life. 13-year-old Elena, 11-year-old Carlos, and 9-year-old Sophia visited me regularly, and I helped Elena with her journalism school applications. She wanted to follow in my footsteps, seeking truth and justice for people who couldn't fight for themselves. "You gave us back our mother's memory," Elena told me during one visit. "Before, people said she died because she was careless, because poor people don't deserve better. Now everyone knows she died because rich people chose money over safety. That matters." The ripple effects extended beyond our immediate case. Federal prosecutors used our investigation as a template for examining corruption in other cities. 3 similar criminal enterprises had been discovered and prosecuted using techniques developed during our case. Municipal housing authorities across the country had implemented new oversight procedures to prevent the kind of systematic fraud my family had perpetrated. My apartment had been transformed from a lonely space where I processed family rejection into a warm home where my chosen family gathered regularly. Sunday dinners now included people who supported each other's growth rather than exploiting each other's vulnerabilities. The emotional healing had been gradual but profound. Therapy helped me understand that my family's treatment of me was never about my worth as a person. It was about maintaining control and hiding their criminal activities. The approval I had desperately sought from people who were incapable of genuine love had been replaced by authentic relationships built on mutual respect and shared values. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I had never investigated Meridian construction, if I had never discovered my family's corruption. Would they still be stealing from vulnerable families? Would Maria Santos's death have remained unexplained? Would other mothers have died in buildings they knew were unsafe? The answer convinced me that everything had unfolded as it should. Justice had been served not through revenge or personal satisfaction, but through systematic exposure of truth and accountability for actions that had harmed innocent people. As I finished writing these words sitting in my home office, surrounded by journalism awards and photos with my chosen family, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't seeing my biological family imprisoned. It was discovering that I was capable of building something better than what I had lost. The woman who had stood in her empty apartment holding a crumpled invitation, devastated by her sister's cruel dismissal, no longer existed. In her place was someone who understood that family loyalty means protecting the innocent, that real success means making the world safer for vulnerable people, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable the people who raised you when they choose evil over good. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever discovered that people you trusted were betraying your values or hurting others? How did you find the courage to choose justice over family loyalty when the two came into conflict? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else facing a similar situation. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about standing up to corruption and finding strength in unexpected places. Share this video with someone who needs to know that choosing integrity over family pressure is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. Thank you for joining me on this journey from family betrayal to chosen family love. Remember that blood doesn't make family. Shared values, mutual support, and genuine care make family. Until next time, keep seeking truth and never let anyone convince you to stay silent about injustice, even when the people demanding your silence claim to love you.